Hello and welcome to the show, everybody. This is Ross, your host of the Zodiac Files, speaking. Today we have Richard Grinnell of ZodiacCyphers.com. He's also one half of the Zodiac Speaking podcast with Mike Morford. That is one of my favorite Zodiac resources. Make sure you guys head over to wherever you get podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. That's pretty much what I use, but you could like and review the show there. And Richard, welcome to your debut on the channel. How are you doing today, sir?
Hi, Ross. How are you? Doing fine, thanks.
I'm great, man. Been looking forward to the show for a while. I just told you off air how people are always asking me, when are you getting this guy? When are you getting Grinnell? I'm like, I'll try. You know what I mean? So
I don't normally do this. The one for Ned was the first one I ever did. So
yeah.
It's
Excellent.
a strange experience for me. For people like Mike and Michael Butterfield, it's commonplace, isn't it?
Yeah, I hear it. But I think your name comes up a lot with, as one of the original Zodiac researchers, because, if you Google the Zodiac Killer, I think your site is one of the first few sites that comes up, along with Zodiac Killer Facts and, the rest of them, Mike's site, of course. So I think that's why you get thrown in the mix quite a bit, sir. You've done your work.
Thank you very much, Ross.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it'd, be a good place, as you said. You don't do a lot of interviews and media and such. So give us a little bit of your own background, whatever you're comfortable with, and how you came to launching your website and whatnot.
Well, previously I ran a speedway website. I don't know if you know much about 4 bikes racing around a track. I don't know if you watched that in America.
Yeah, we've got the motocross and stuff here. I've watched a little bit of it. I don't know if I know that lane particularly.
Yeah, this is just on an oval track, 4 riders going around 4 laps. And I started a website on that originally and ran that for about 3 years. But I've always been interested in mysteries and puzzles. And I was scouring the internet, and that's when I found the 340 cipher on Tom Voigt's site and had a crack at it. Obviously failed miserably. But then revisited it and found all the letters on his website. And that's what got me interested in the Zodiac case above others, because of the complexity and the amount of material that he sent in.
Absolutely. So
but I'd never heard of the Zodiac until about 2011. I didn't watch the movie till about 2013. Not many people over here know about the Zodiac Killer. A handful, but not like in America, where it's known by virtually everybody.
Right. Yeah. And that's one of the things that always interested me about your research and your website. I was always like, it's so impressive that this guy is halfway across the world and across the pond from us. And, again, you seem to have top tier knowledge of the case as far as how deep you've dived into, every little detail. Of course, your Sherry Joe Bates article was one of the blueprints we used for my episode 3 of Zodiac Files. So it's always just amazing to me, like, wow, this guy is all the way out here and, has still managed to dig up this amount of information. You know what I mean?
Well, if you'd have probably read my early articles back in 2012 and 13, probably up to about 2015, you might not have said the same thing. Because obviously, as you get further and further in the case, you learn more and more as you go along. So you have to learn by your mistakes as you go along. I mean, people still say you're making them now, but you make wrong assumptions until you know more and more about the case. And so many of the earlier articles, I have gone back and amended some of them, corrected them for spelling errors, because again, as you go on in time, you learn how to write a little bit better. You make punctuation errors when you first start. So there's many mistakes in my early articles, which I'm sure people could find. And I went a bit haywire in doing all this gematria when I started, and I've probably deleted about 40 articles.
Yeah, you've probably deleted more than you've posted at this point. So what, how early were you into the case before you launched the website? Was it shortly after you began your research, or were you deep into the case for a while before you went public with your research? Let us know that.
I started the website, which was rudimentary in nature when I first started. But as soon as I learned about the Zodiac case and found all those letters connected to the case, I began the website probably about 2 months later. But it was very limited, it was just basically reading stuff on Wikipedia, just adding the main inner pages to the site before I then decided to start writing a blog page. And that's when I started. The first thing I ever wrote, I think, was about Kevin Robert Brooks' suspect. And Donald Lee Booyock, and I wrote about 7 or 8, 9 articles for him, and then I moved on into just general Zodiac material.
Outstanding. So since you got into a little bit of the suspects there, as far as I know, you're not quite partial to any of the mainstream suspects. Is that correct? The jury's kind of still out on it for you?
Well, I've read into all the suspects early on. I mean, this is many years ago. I went through them all in detail and wouldn't give them much more than 1 in 1,000 chance of being Zodiac, any of them. Let's put this back on you. If I said to you, how many suspects in the last 30 years, let's say since the internet has been up and running properly, how many suspects do you think have been named on forums in the last 30 years?
Oh man, thousands, 5,000, somewhere in that realm.
Yeah, and let's say we could probably name 300 if we scoured through them, but let's say 5,000. I mean, people actually naming suspects on the forums rather than what the detectives. Now, I would say, I mean, is it fair to say that people start with a suspect and they keep adding material to him, say like a Lego set, such as the 10.5 shoes he was in the military. He had a job that would have employed the use of radians. He liked the theater and films. He lived in Vallejo or San Francisco. They just keep adding things to ultimately convince themselves this was the Zodiac. Now, what I would say is if this was a reliable technique of identifying suspects, shouldn't everybody have come to the same conclusion on one suspect alone? And
or at least narrow it down to a couple towns or whatever, like you said, Vallejo and the nearby cities.
But the fact we've got, say, 3,000 suspects, 2,999 people are wrong, unless you believe there's multiple killers. And therefore, I would suggest that looking for suspects is not a very accurate technique.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm in the same boat. I'm not super partial to any of the mainstream suspects. I mean, that being said, I will say I do like Morph's geo-profiling technique that seems to have sound reasoning, as you guys have mentioned on the podcast.
If you had to go with one suspect, who would you pick?
I mean, my personal theory is that it's not any of the known people. I mean, I think Drew Beeson is in the chat. I think he's got a really good angle with what he covers in the Sighting and on the Zodiac book. So I'm kind of 50-50 between if it's someone known, I think it's probably Drew Beeson might have it, or it's my theory that it's just a completely unknown cult member that hasn't been discovered. Somewhere in between those, I know that's a big gap.
Yeah, I mean, Drew did some good work with Bakersfield. And the Paul Avery connection, and I do like his Paradise connection. That is quite a good find.
Quite striking.
To jump me over the line, no, but that's anybody would have been proud of that find, the Paradise thing, because I think that is rare to be almost unique, isn't it?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, and the way Drew puts it, it's like 1 in a million to have that, that familial name, connection. So, or somewhere around that.
Because in your video, you mentioned Ross Sullivan. I thought maybe you were leaning towards him, especially for the Sherry Joe Bates murder.
Yeah, that's correct. I'm leaning towards him for the Sherry Joe Bates murder, but obviously not the Zodiac, because he's only gets as far north as Santa Cruz. There's nothing putting him at any of the canonicals. So he's also, in my opinion, way too big. I mean, he's like, he's like 6'3", and of course he later on gets the Pickwickian syndrome, which is uncontrollable weight gain. So he'd be north of 300 pounds, and then I don't know, somebody with that kind of health problem. Zodiac was pretty mobile. So I would be out on Sullivan for Zodiac. I mean, there's some stuff there, but not enough, as you said. You know?
And nobody yet has been able to put him within 70 miles of the nearest crime, have they?
There's that. So I mean, there's really nothing to have him in the Bay or North Bay at all. You know, I mean, so I mean, I think somebody like that at Lake Berryessa would have been, you know, fairly identifiable just from, you know, stature and height alone. You know what I mean? So,
what are your thoughts on the murder of Sherry Jo Bates?
Oh yeah, well, let me back you up a little bit because I have that one question away. I know that what guys have covered on the podcast. It appears that you're pretty much out on, you know, what my series covers, which is the Zodiac pre-crimes. Not that I've ever said it's definitely Zodiac, but Ray Davis, the swindles. Let's back into that before we get to Sherry, because it just seems like, I don't know. Obviously you guys did cover it on Zodiac Speaking. I'm just wondering, are you totally out on Ray Davis, the swindles, and Santa Barbara?
Well, I'm not totally out. I'd be foolish to dismiss them all because obviously we just don't know. I just think the amount of evidence available for them to be connected to Zodiac is very, very slim, sparse. So I don't know how anybody can look at Dominguez and Edwards. I can see the overall similarity that people point out. But to boldly declare that Zodiac based on what people have suggested, I mean, we have a couple. The bindings are probably the best connection. I see little after that. .22 weaponry, that's hardly unique in America, is it?
Yeah, so I mean, you could make the argument that .22 ammunition is the cheapest and most widely available and common ammunition, as you said. But how about the Winchester Super X brand name, though? I mean, that's Zodiac talked about it in a letter that I got to say that's probably as close as the binding, you know, for me. But again,
well, not being from America, I wouldn't know how rare that ammunition is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was more popular at the time. So
yeah, and I don't personally believe Zodiac targeted couples either. I believe he targeted locations. I don't know if you heard me say that on the podcast.
I believe that as well. I've mentioned that, so I'm in agreement with you there. But it's just, I mean, you know, he had options at Berryessa, right? There's the dentist and his son. Of course, the kid had a rifle with him, so that may have deterred him. And then if you want to say, we could get to Berryessa later, but the lurker with the 3 girls. I mean, there's nothing definite to say that the lurker was Zodiac. Of course, I'm sure you guys covered that many times. But going back to the pre-crimes, I mean, I think there is quite a bit there with Ray Davis, to be honest with you. I mean, let's just get your opinion of the water connection theory or the water sacrifice theory. Of course, at starting with Ray Davis, that's in the city of Oceanside. He was just nearly a block or not even a block from the waterfront. Of course, Ocean Beach is the swindles, and then Sherry Jo is from Riverside, of course. So yeah. I mean, but other than the .22 ammunition, you do have the water connection. Of course, that's a water sacrifice theory. So there's a little bit more. I mean, I totally see both sides, so I'm not going either direction on this. I'm just trying to get your general thoughts.
Do you want my opinion on Ray Davis in particular?
Yeah, I'd love it.
Because we know that taxi cab murders were not particularly rare. They were quite common. And it did vary different from the Paul Stine murder in the fact that he was found down the alleyway and his cab was found about a mile, I believe, west of the murder site. So that varied a little bit. I mean, the interesting part of it was the threat that something was going to happen in Oceanside, you know, before the crime actually took place, and the threat on a bus driver, I believe, shortly afterwards.
Correct.
This is the interesting aspect of it. And on that basis, I certainly wouldn't dismiss it. But I think, again, the threats, how rare are threats? They're not usual, but is that all we're basing it on? The mixture of a taxi cab murder and some threats combined? Is that really to tip us over the edge and say, oh, this is probably Zodiac? I don't think that's enough.
And the 2.2 pistol. I mean, that would be 3, right? The threats.
Certainly.
The 2.2 ammunition. Well, one for me is that shot to the temple shot. That's almost, and the Paul Stine shot. It's like that head shot, if you will, or the coup de grace. That seems very, in my opinion. Let me just explain to everybody, guys. I'm the host of a YouTube channel. I don't have a forensic background. I'm not a law enforcement expert, but just looking at all of the experts, such as Richard's research and other research I've done on my own. It seems to be like almost his call sign, you know what I mean? It's either like that below the eye temple shot or the behind the ear, like Paul Stine. And again, I'm spitballing there. That could be absolutely nothing, but it looks similar to me, in my opinion.
Yeah. But also Paul Stine was a 9mm. So
right. Yeah. He switched the caliber a few times. Definitely.
Yeah. So he could easily have used the same gun, obviously, in all the crimes. That would have been easier than proving himself as he did. I mean, I could explain why I don't think the early crimes are Zodiac in a little bit more of a convoluted way, if you want me to do that.
Sure, go for it.
I mean,
this is your day.
I would say if you go back right to the beginning when he sent his first letters, he was questioned by Chief Jack Stilts whether the writer of the July the 31st letters was the killer, asking him to send more details. And he did. He immediately wrote the August the 4th letter. He then attached himself to Berryessa by writing on the car door. He took a piece of Paul Stine's shirt from the Presidio Heights murder scene and sent it to the Chronicle saying, to prove I'm the murderer, here's a bloodstained piece of his shirt. Then he mailed the November the 9th letter stating, to prove I am the Zodiac, ask the Vallejo cop about my gun sight. Now, the Vallejo cop he was talking about was Jack Stilts. So my point being, he was a braggart who constantly wanted to prove he was the killer, yet subsequent to the Paul Stine murder, he provided absolutely no proof, giving just vague details. Now, he was eventually found out because he claimed the Snoozy and Furlong murders throughout his communications, in my opinion. And when Carl Francis Werner was arrested and convicted of the murders, that proved he was a liar. Hang on. Yes, then he claimed he shot a man in a parked car. Now, we believe that to be Richard Radetich.
Yeah, he insinuated it was Radetich.
He insinuated it was Radetich. I think most people believe it is, but he left the door slightly ajar and called him a man rather than a cop. So if somebody had been arrested and found guilty of that murder, he had himself a little bit of an escape clause by saying, no, I said it was a man. Now, again, when he mailed the Pines card, he never actually admitted to the disappearance of Donna Lass. He just gave us a cryptic card. And then in reference to Sherry Joe Bates in the Los Angeles letter, he said Riverside activity. And that left open the possibility he was responsible for the murders, the letters, or both. So my point being, subsequent to October the 11th, 1969, he never went into any detail about any of these murders he was claiming, which probably means he wasn't responsible for any of them, in my opinion, of course. And that includes Sherry Joe Bates. And to me, we'll probably talk about it in a while with Sherry Joe Bates, but the autopsy to me doesn't suggest it was committed by a 40-year-old, which I think the Zodiac killer was, at least 40 years of age.
Yeah, that was actually not convoluted at all. I think you laid that out perfectly. Well, I'll quickly just give you my opinion on the pre-crimes or the non-canonicals. And that is, if it were, I'm just going to speak completely hypothetically, because as you said, we have no direct forensic evidence on this stuff. But if it were to be a young Zodiac in these cases, going all the way, working his way north rather, and he clearly, whoever did Santa Barbara appears to have made a mistake because of the bruise on, Dominguez's hand. Like, it looks like he may have hit the assailant. And then you know, obviously you have the evolution of like Lake, you know, they say the similarity to Lompoc, Gavita Beach is Lake Berryessa with the repetition of the rope bindings, as you stated. So he appears, if that were the case, he appears to have learned from it that first time, which is why he had Shepard tie up Hartnell. Obviously, Hartnell was like a very tall guy, which is probably like one of the biggest threats that he faced. You know what I mean? And the situation with Davis, in my opinion, if that was a young Zodiac, he thought he was going to cause this, you know, the same type of hysteria he caused in the Bay Area, Oceanside, like being between San Diego and Los Angeles. He essentially, maybe at that point, he was thinking of targeting like Los Angeles and doing what he did there to the Bay Area. Obviously, as you stated, like this guy is obsessed with his own ego. He didn't get the response. And if Davis was him, he didn't get the response he wanted because he called before. He said, I'm going to pull something. He called after. He said, you know, the bus driver threat, as you stated. And then eventually it all just kind of faded away. And it didn't become this big, fiasco, this massive event that happened in the Bay Area with the canonical crimes. So like, it's almost like it's a dry run. And then the Paul Stine thing, you know, it could have been a, like an homage to the Ray Davis murder, like him coming full circle, in other words, with his last known canonical crime that he claimed, as you stated. It's like a little hint back to like, you know, maybe it was Ray Davis. That's my convoluted theory. There might be nothing to that. I'm just going to state that.
Oh, that's fair enough. You use all of the crimes together as him sort of going through a process of sort of developing into who he was eventually.
Yes, exactly.
And what about the Swindle murders? Do you think they're as strong as the others? Ray Davis?
I think it's quite convincing. I think that like where I would be at like 75% on the Swindles being a young Zodiac, because I mean, I'm sure, I don't know if you managed to see me and Brian's video, but like we have broke down that whole area, and the whole thing has a very Zodiac feel to the way he targets those other locations. And then I have a lot of questions about, whoever Johnny being a radio man, whoever he may have served with on the Hanson, you know, because they were both fresh from Alabama. They hadn't been in San Diego very long. So in my opinion, it would like almost have to be someone he worked with, other than the fact that was their ritual of walking down. Joyce was, she loved the ocean. So they basically had that nighttime ritual so the only two possibilities for me are kind of someone he mentioned to at work, like on the ship, or, you know, when he was serving, hey, me and my wife like to go for a walk down to the water, or they were doing it so frequently, somebody else was down there watching them maybe for days or weeks or whatever until they targeted. So I would be at like 75% on the Swindles being a young Z. I'm at like an 85% on Davis because Christy Hawthorne, who we interviewed in episode 2, we actually had a lot more with her, but the audio wasn't great, so it didn't all make it into the episode. But there's a train that runs right near there, so it's like people make a big deal about where Davis was shot right between those two mayor's houses, you know, the current mayor and the former mayor. So there's the whole weird political angle there. And then there's actually that train that goes by. So if he brought him down there at gunpoint, had him wait for the train to go by, and then fired the shot, you probably wouldn't have heard anything at night. You know what I mean? So it all seems very tactical and calculated, which you can make that argument that Zodiac is in the canonical crimes, which other people say that he's just a complete idiot. It was a bad shot. I mean, I don't really buy all that. So that's kind of on those. Sherry, I'm at the lowest percentage for Sherry out of any of those, to be honest, including Santa Barbara.
What do you think about the connection to Johnny and Joyce Swindle to the one sniper attack west of the Dominguez and Edwards crime scene and the sound of gunshots in the days around their murders? Do you think there's any connection between those sniper attacks, the Swindle murders, and Dominguez and Edwards?
Yeah, I have a lot of questions about that. I think there could be, but at the same time, it's almost like that Vern Smith thing where they just throw in Vern Smith, like, well, he got stabbed by this guy, Sandy, that was never seen again ever for the history of forever. So it's like, as you said, it could be related, but there's so many tangential, possibilities and cases with those situations that it's just like, I really don't think Sandy or the Vern Smith thing is probably related to Santa Barbara in any way. But the same thing of course, if there's a random sniper going around, yeah, there's a lot of questions, and either a young Zodiac or some other guy with essentially the same MO seems very strange. I have a lot of questions about all of it, Richard. That's why we're here.
Well, what do you reckon about Michael Cole's observation? I think it first originated from Michael Cole about the paint spattered watch. Because he was painting that day, and then suddenly a paint spattered watch appears at the Sherry Joe Bates crime scene. Do you think that's a little bit weak, or do you put any credence in that?
Man, I'm honestly 50-50 on that, because people do a lot with the painting. People say that, of course, Ross Sullivan worked in the library and they were repainting the book bindings, although he was never known to wear a watch. So they try to do the painting connection with him. Of course, Johnny Swindle was painting for his landlady part-time for the break on the rent. Of course, Dr. Howard Davis puts Bruce Davis in there as a pipe fitter working on the RCC reconstruction and possibly like painting as well. So, to say that, Swindle's watch is found at CJB, I personally feel it's a bit of a stretch. But again, because when I started these pre-canonicals, I was at, or Z pre-crimes as I call them, I was at like probably 65% of Sherry Joe Bates being a Zodiac. Of course, there's that. I'd like to ask you is, where do you fall on the recent news of the Bates had to die letters being the hoaxer, the recent announcement by Riverside PD? Because if that is the case, well, then that kind of lowers Sherry being the Zodiac even more. And then the painted watch really doesn't matter much at that point, right? So, or at least as a connection to those others.
I don't believe the man who admitted to authoring the Bates letters was telling the truth, frankly.
Okay, sure.
And the reason why is probably different to most people, in that he didn't also admit to the desktop poem and confession letter, which I believe were all written by the same person. Based on the language in each. I've gone through this before, and I don't know if you've read it, but if you look at the Bates letters, they only consisted of 8 words. And the desktop poem only contained 46 words. That's 54 words in total. But both contained the phrase "to die," as did the confession letter, which hadn't been publicly released in its entirety, especially those 2 words. The desktop poem, if you remember, was called "Sick of Living, Unwilling to Die." Now, the confession letter stated, "I am not sick, I'm insane." The confession letter stated she was very willing to talk to me. In other words, the opposite of unwilling, willing.
Yep.
And finally, the confession letter stated it was about time for her to die. So virtually the entirety of the desktop title was present in the confession letter. And also, if you look at the bottom of the desktop poem, it finished with "just wait till next time," with the confession letter stating, "I said it was about time." She said, "About time for what?" "I said it was about time for her to die." So there's a complete linkage, especially when you consider that there was only 8 words in the Bates letters, 46 words in the desktop poem, and yet "to die" was present in all 3. And I probably believe that the desktop poem was written about the same time as the confession letter. So I believe they were all written by one mischievous young person, and therefore with the same author effectively. So I don't believe, unless that bloke had admitted to all 3, he's not responsible for any of them.
Yeah, I think you have a super solid point on that. And so let's come full circle on CJB, because there's a lot to unpack with the Riverside activity. You don't believe Sherry Joe Bates was the Zodiac, and if that was the case, how about the letters? Could it just be Zodiac sending the letters and didn't actually do to the crime, which is like what we think is like a Donna Lass or a Ratatich or a Donna Lass situation, where he obviously knows about these other cases and he's trying to insert himself in the narrative?
Well, I don't believe the letters are written by Zodiac either.
Okay.
I don't think Zodiac was connected to Riverside at all. I mean, you can't say for certain, but
Right.
when I look at the confession letter, I see it from a very sexual element. You know, I'll cut off their private parts and post them all around town.
Yeah, that sounds like Jack the Ripper with the cut out her parts, you know.
Yeah, it sounds like a sexual sadist. Her breast felt very warm.
Yep.
He mentioned Bates by name. He never did this to any of the victims in the Zodiac case. I think the language is much more childish, but probably somebody,
True.
at least a teenager. And these are the reasons. They're not brilliant reasons, because obviously the Zodiac can change. It doesn't mean he never was sexually in any earlier crimes. He could have just decided to stop. Who knows? But there's nothing in those letters that certainly wasn't present in the newspapers, and certainly doesn't suggest to me it was a Zodiac killer. But I understand why people do, because of the connection with the language, you know, with the little list letter.
Yeah,
I understand that. But that came out first. So Zodiac could have read that article in, what was it called? True Detective.
Yeah.
And he could have dropped that specifically into the little list letter to plant the seed in detectives' minds. And then, if you remember, after the little list letter, apart from the 13-hole postcard, he drops the Halloween card. And this is why the Zodiac was connected to Riverside. So maybe he was planting the seed in detectives' minds. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there. And I think, if anything, I personally don't think Riverside was Zodiac until we have something more concrete. But I think it's possible maybe he could have done the letters. And as you stated, you know, there's this whole thing of him saying, you know, I waited for her, I pulled out the distributor cord, and, you know, so he basically parrots these things that were already in published articles, you know, like one of those officers said, like, oh, the confession was definitely the killer, and because he stated things only the killer knew, you know, to quote Zodiac. But the actual fact is, as you just stated, is some of that stuff was previously published already, like publicly. So he could easily have read that, reincorporated it in the letter. And then, of course, he says, you know, she was super willing, and she went to the slaughter like a lamb, gave herself up like a sacrifice, and didn't fight back, which the crime scene shows that, like, she obviously did fight back, right? So there's direct inconsistencies.
Oh, she fought back heavily. I mean, one of the main reasons why I think the most reliable eyewitnesses in the Zodiac case were the ones from Presidio Heights. And as I said earlier, we had three eyewitnesses, the three teenagers. We had Falcons Elms, and to me, I believe that there was eyewitnesses by Spruce Street where they entered the park.
Yep.
And one said about 40, around 40. I think the kid said in the police report, was it early 40s? The park witnesses said about 40, and Donald Fouke said 35 to 45. That averages out about 40 to me. And therefore, because the autopsy, like I said earlier, suggests to me a much younger killer, inexperienced killer.
Right.
If this was Zodiac, if you imagine that he killed Cecilia Shepard, not immediately, and Brian Hartnell was near death.
Right.
I don't know if you want to talk about the autopsy separately, but I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Totally up to you. You can go wherever it takes you.
But if you look at the autopsy, there was only 3 wounds on her torso, 1 on her back. There was only 3 on her arms, and like you said, she fought hard because there were many wounds on her hands, and she had abrasions and lacerations on her face. None of the stab wounds, of which there were only 4 on her torso, were fatal. There were 2 nicks in her, I believe, left lung. But none of those were devastating blows that would have killed her, only the 7 lacerations to her neck. And this is what finally finished her off. I think it severed her right carotid artery.
Correct.
So she fought hard. I reckon this struggle went on for at least a minute. I think a really strong individual wouldn't have struggled this to this extent with Sherry Jo Bates, even though she was a fairly fit woman.
Sure.
So because the discrepancy between who I think the killer was at Riverside and Presidio Heights, I think the age difference is totally different. I don't know what your take is on the autopsy.
Yeah, as far as the age difference and the physical description, I would agree. As far as the autopsy, well, what you're dealing with is like a 1.5 to 3 inch blade. I believe that to be like possibly one of those Navy pocket knives. I actually have one from my grandfather when he was in the service. Kind of goes along with the military style dress shoes. And then, as you said, the forensics at the scene is it's a 8.5 or between 8 and 10 inch footprint, and the watch band was 7 inches. That sounds like a smaller guy than Zodiac's physical descriptions at Berryessa and Presidio, as you said, like a 5'10" to 220 or 200 to 220 pound guy. Like that's never going to fit probably a 7 inch watch band. That's like you're dealing with a much smaller and, like you said, possibly younger individual at Riverside. So it's all very confusing, which is why we're here. But yeah, it doesn't quite perfectly add up for me. Plus, as you said, if the age thing is correct, which I mean we don't have a definite, but we do have those witnesses at Presidio. I feel like that guy would have stuck out like a sore thumb. I don't picture that guy hanging out in the Riverside City College library. That library was extremely small before the reconstruction, by the way. So like an older 40-year-old sketchy dude hanging around with a bunch of 19-year-old college kids. Like I feel like he would have stuck out like a sore thumb if we believe his story in the confession letter, which is I went inside and I waited for her, then I disabled it. It's like, dude, if all these people saw you hanging around, like you would have stuck out clearly. You know what I mean? In my opinion. I mean, granted, I'm no expert, so good.
Do you feel it was pre-planned, the crime?
Yeah, I do, because there's that story about her friend waving to her and she didn't see her, and then they said that the car, the so-called Studebaker, could have possibly been following her on the way. So I mean, I don't really know if that's factual, but if that's the case, I feel it leads to a predetermined argument. And then the smoking man smoking the cigarettes in the shadows before, basically before it happens. If you got some guy waiting around and following her car around, and it leads in that direction, in my opinion.
And also you can sort of measure the time gap between the scream and the old car starting up, which might suggest where the assailant's car was located. But going back to that, when you talk about the Air Force man and that young woman who saw her approaching, that was around 6:10. Mm-hmm. Now, she was seen by the Mexican-American student at about 5:30, and when the doors opened. She can't be in two places at once. So I think Ray Grant probably might have got it right here, that she got to the library, then she rang her friend at the National Bank looking for her memorandum.
Yep.
Probably went back home, which is about a 20-minute journey there and back. And that would have then put her leaving, say, Riverside the first time at the college, at about 5:40, getting home, looking for a memorandum, coming back. That's probably why the discrepancy exists there between the two times. So I don't know what your thoughts are on whether she went home or not and came back again a second time.
Yeah, I could see that being accurate. The timeline is a very interesting discussion because, for one, it's daylight savings on that night. That's changed here in America. I don't know how you guys do it over there, but it was also. One more time.
I thought you were stopping daylight savings in America, I heard.
yeah, we're still voting on it. You know how our politics goes. It's very difficult. To use your word, convoluted doesn't even begin to describe it. So, of course, we have this abduction theory that perhaps no one saw her leave the library, at least none of her friends or people who recognized her. So that's where this whole theory comes in, that she perhaps left with this man, was gone all night, and then came back at the time of her death. And then the neighbor hears the screams at approximately 10:30, but then you also have daylight savings. So it's like, that's why I called the episode the Sherry Jo Bates mystery, because every single fact is all over the place. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's really wild.
Well, Ray Grant believes the abduction theory, doesn't he? He believes that somebody went in and checked out her reading material, books. And then
Yeah.
But surely they wouldn't they have tested the books to see if her fingerprints were on it?
You would think so. And then there's those greasy fingerprints all over the car. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, the abduction theory, if we got more information, I could see it being possible. Someone going in and checking out her books, though, and then, I mean, I feel that she maybe just would have come out with her books, placed them on the seat, and then she's dealing with this thing of her car being disabled. You know, that's my gut feeling, but, you know, who knows? Maybe I'm way off on that.
Well, you don't therefore believe she was in the library. She came out early, checked them in, and was out the library before 6:30, say.
Yeah, I think that could be possible. I think that could be very possible.
I mean, the way I mean, I've done so many conflicting articles because we just don't know with this one. But my guess, a lot of people come to the conclusion that her car was disabled, and then the killer sort of hovered around waiting her, and then came up like a good Samaritan.
Yeah.
Whereas I tend to get the impression when she failed to have a meeting with Stephanie Gutman at the, to meet her at the library, she may have made alternative plans, and hence why she left the library early, went off with a person unknown, came back with this person, and maybe I considered the disabling of the vehicle and her attack coincided with one another at around 10:15. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. In other words, it wasn't a predetermined disabling. It was done in the heat of the moment to prevent her getting away. Because I
like that. I think that's highly convincing. I really like the angle that you're taking on that. I mean, there's just, again, the Sherry Jo Bates thing is just so all over the case. I mean, how about the mention in the confession letter of the phone call? I mean, would that be similar to the Ray Davis phone calls and Zodiac's later phone calls after Lake Herman and Blue Rock Springs? I mean, if there was a phone call, does that do anything for you, or is it just?
Well, was there a phone call? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's claimed that there was. I haven't personally found any definitive research on that, but in the confession letter, he says that was me who called or whatever at the end. So, I mean, it kind of falls into the pattern, but as you've said, it's literally the most convoluted case ever. So,
yeah, it's a difficult one. I don't know about the phone call personally.
Yeah,
it is another little connection to Zodiac, though, isn't it? So
that's what I'm saying in the pattern. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't really comment further on that because I know Tom Voigt's got an opinion on it, but I can't go any further on that myself.
Yeah, I got you. Well, I mean, unless you have anything else on Sherry, I think we could move on to the canonical timeline, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'm easy. You can talk about Sherry more if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think we covered it pretty good. I mean, guys, if you have any questions on Sherry Jo Bates, you can feel free to jump in the chat. Of course, we've got Richard Grinnell on episode 6, volume 6 today. So make your way on over to zodiacciphers.com. Yeah, I mean, let's dive into the canonicals because there's just so much here. I'd like to zero in on something. I mean, you guys have really covered so much amazing information on the podcast that there's definitely a few things I want to hit on that you guys have mentioned. Hopefully it's not too repetitive for you.
No,
I think it's the you guys discussed what 7 or 8 shots and the number of shells. Was this Lake Herman Road or Blue Rock Springs where there's this like supposed missing shell? I just was wondering if we could touch on that. If you know what I'm referring to.
Well, the only 10 shots were fired, and 10 casings were marked on the police drawings. But they reckon 2. Well, I won't go into the bullets, but when you look at the DOJ report, there is a missing casing, and there's actually also a missing bullet, which is why I brought up the thing in the Stine letter, because that was an unusual mention by Great Crimes and Trials. Mm-hmm. But there's certainly a missing casing, and my interpretation was that they marked it down, but when they towed the Rambler away, that casing went missing. Mm-hmm. And we know that Mike Rodelli has mentioned that Russ Butterback might have taken it home as a souvenir. Mm-hmm. And my argument was that David Faraday was shot by a right-handed shooter by the right rear wheel, because his body was found with his feet virtually touching the tire. And that couldn't have happened if the killer had been holding him from behind and standing to the right edge of the Rambler. So my interpretation was that because the passenger door was open, a casing ejected into David Faraday's left side would have ejected into the passenger floorboard, which is where it was found. And we know that they itemized, I think it was 7 bullets, even though 8 they recovered. They only itemized 7 in the DOJ report, and all but 1. And that the one being David Faraday's head, all the bullets showed right-hand twist characteristics, apart from the one fired into David Faraday's brain. And they said they could determine this. So without knowing, that could be a separate bullet into David Faraday's head. And without knowing the markings on that casing, those two could be connected. And it makes sense that those two should be connected because, like I said, a right-handed shooter shooting David Faraday facing him to his left side, the casing may very well have ejected in off the door or directly into the passenger side of the Rambler. So we could have a second shooter, one shooting at Betty Lou Jensen, who also approached the car first. This would have been the driver. The other person who arrived after, when David Faraday got out second, he's the one who secured him, while the other person shot Betty Lou Jensen. So we could have a distribution of 9 shots by one assailant and 1 shot by the other, securing David Faraday while the other one shot Betty Lou. That was my thoughts on it. But it was just a theory. And until we can find that shell casing and analyze it, we'll never know whether there was a second shooter, in theory. Plus, if you remember, the August the 4th letter said, I sprayed them as if it was from a water hose. So is he talking from his perspective? Because David Faraday wasn't sprayed as if it was from a water hose. So this could have been the person who shot Betty Lou Jensen, who was talking from his perspective and not the person securing David Faraday, if you know what I'm saying.
Absolutely. That was one, you guys totally captivated my attention when you brought up that topic on the episode, because that, in my opinion, was one of the most interesting things that you guys raised. Of course, Morph mentioned that, this possible thing that, one of these guys took this souvenir from the crime scene. And then I think you're right on point. I like that angle of where you think like the casing may have landed. So since you guys did raise that, I believe you did cover it on the episode as well. Where are you at on Zodiac being like a lone, killer or having help? Because it seems like with the letters, it could be possible he had some help, at least with the letter writing and mailing. And then that brings up the topic of, could he have had assistance on the actual crime scenes as well?
Well, I did consider the notion that he may have been with a partner for Lake Herman Road and then for whatever reason got the taste and the other person dropped out. I don't personally believe there was more than one shooter, or I think the killer and the letter writer were just one person. But It doesn't hurt to consider it, because if you remember Blue Rock Springs, why did the killer shoot 5 times if he had 9 bullets? Why didn't he just fire the 9 and then leave? Why did he leave and then return? Surely he must have known at the point he shot the first 5 that Michael Mageau was still alive. So I don't understand. Yeah. My thoughts were the only way I could bend this to the way of 2 shooters was walk backwards to the car, because remember the headlights of the rear car would have obscured Michael Mageau's view of anybody in that car. Maybe he went back, passed the gun to another person and said, you finished the job off. We're in this together. It's not very likely, but it was just something I considered.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I personally think, it was most likely a lone, shooter and letter writer. But at the same time, like you said, that's literally the first two canonicals, and there's already so many inconsistencies. You know, it's pretty clear. It seems that he was alone at Lake Berryessa because it was broad daylight and the footprints in and out. But yeah. So given that you brought up Blue Rock Springs, I just want to get your thoughts on the whole, you know, the Darlene Ferrin stories of the occult or witches coven, and there was the Virgin Islands thing. You know, stories about her ex-husband. I know there. It seems like a lot of it is rumor at this point, but I'm just wondering, have you ever found anything convincing on Ferrin's background? You know, the whole painting party I'm alluding to, and all of these other things that get brought up in her background. Did you see anything there, or do you think it's kind of just become a rabbit hole?
No, I don't see anything in this whatsoever. I think Michael Butterfield hit the nail on the head when he analysed this. This all came up. This all should have been mentioned in the immediate hours or days after the crime. This all seems to have spilled out at a later date. Sort of, you know, I don't know about the painting party. Is there no evidence that that ever occurred, is there?
Yeah, none whatsoever. I mean, the painting party for me is like a bit odd, because if you supposedly have this guy that Graysmith insinuates is Alan, you know, coming here, and then you know, the same man who is supposedly harassing her at the restaurant, you know, the argument in the parking lot, blah 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 blah. It seems super peculiar to me, because my whole argument to that would be like, okay, if this guy was coming into her shift every night and harassing her, then they had a massive, you know, like visible argument in the parking lot, and then he comes to her painting party, which supposedly a bunch of police officers attended, and not one of those guys was adept enough to identify Alan in this case, or whoever other that Zodiac suspect would be. That's my problem with it. You know what I mean?
And if she was being seriously stalked, you might have thought she'd have reported it. But
right.
you had things like Pam Huckabee coming out and saying that Darlene mentioned to her that I'll be in the news tomorrow.
Yeah.
But everybody probably knows that's to do with the fair that she went to earlier that day. I think they got second prize or something, didn't they? So I think these are all being twisted out of all proportion. And I can't remember, there was a ridiculous 2-part documentary. What's the guy? What's his name? Gerardo Rivaldo or something. Do you know who I mean?
I'm not sure.
They did the documentary all about the occult angle. It was back in the 80s, I think, wasn't it? So, and I didn't buy it.
Oh, you're talking about Geraldo Rivera?
Geraldo Rivera, that's it, yeah.
So that's the whole satanic panic thing when he brings up Maury Terry and the whole, you know, Ultimate Evil connection. I mean,
they even dragged it into it, didn't they?
You're not a big satanic panic guy, I take it.
No, all this satanic fear mongering who's blown all out of proportion.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I definitely agree that there's just a lot of convoluted nonsense there, but at the same time, my whole angle on that would be, you know, that era was kind of the height of the Church of Satan and occult groups. So I don't know if I would be able to like totally write off the fact that she was interested in the occult or witchcraft, or possibly a part of some sort of Wiccan group. Whether that has literally anything to do with the Zodiac crimes, I wouldn't be able to tell you. You know what I mean? So.
Well, what were your thoughts on the phone calls then that came in around 1:30?
These are the phone calls to Darlene's house?
Yes.
Yeah. So I have such a tough time with that. I mean, whether she was being stalked or whether that would have anything to do, because I'm kind of with you on the locations thing, you know, like I think like, you know, if Zodiac drives around late at night, he can easily pick them out of a Lover's Lane dead end, right? Like it doesn't really need to be related to anything else going on. If he was obsessed with her and stalking her somehow, because again, they've said it was Alan, they've said it was Gaikowski, they've said it was like all these other people, and it's you know Larry Kane or whatever. But it's just like I have a tough time with it, honestly. I mean, you know, there's the whole thing about what the presents coming from Mexico and the man leaving the presents on the door, and then the guy smoking cigarettes out front in the car, and they've said that was the stalker, but at the same time they've also said that was the neighbor. So I really haven't been able to pin any of it down, to be honest with you. I mean, maybe their calls were coming in. Again, I don't know if it's related to the crime, though. You know what I mean? So.
And we also have the drug angle brought up at Lake Herman Road, don't we, with David Faraday?
Yeah. Yep.
But you know, I don't believe that either. So no,
I mean, go ahead.
Carry on.
I am interested. I'm not going to say like I know that it's concrete, but I am interested in the drug angle because, of course, there's the biker gangs and, of course, the drug trade. And I guess they've kind of worked that into Darlene too, with saying she had the mystery money. So again, there could be something going on there, but again, you could have all of that as the backdrop and still have Zodiac randomly ambush them in the night, right? So it's like it doesn't lead me in any direction that this is gonna figure it out for us. You know what I mean? It just means these were the things going on at the time. You know what I mean? For me,
I was curious about the cottage. We had all that going on. We had the police making a drugs bust. We also had the Marshall Ranch nearby, and yet nobody heard the bullets from the Marshall Ranch. Was nobody at home?
Right. Yeah. That's you guys did mention that on the pod, if I'm not mistaken. And again, that's very strange too. You know, some of the characters that pop up, you know, after the scene as these, you know, witnesses that say that they heard something or didn't hear anything. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the way you guys broke down the way the gunshots were heard, it's like conflicting reports, right? They say that they heard this amount of shots, and it doesn't really make sense with the time frame. I think that's what you're saying on the pod, if I'm not mistaken.
I think Mike was on about James Owen.
Mm-hmm.
Not recalling a shot in the first instance. In the second interview, he recalled a shot being heard about a quarter of a mile after he passed the turnout. So, you know, Mike considered the idea that maybe he was elaborating and exaggerating, because why not bring that up the first time if you heard it? But I mean, the most interesting thing, just going back to that, the most interesting thing I found about that was again the DOJ report. We know that Betty Lou was shot 5 times, but it only mentioned 4 bullets being retrieved. So 1 did go missing. That's why I found it very interesting when that great Crimes and Trials mentioned a bullet being present in the Stine letter.
Mm-hmm.
That was so outrageous as to be plucked out of thin air. And when you consider there was a bullet missing from the Lake Herman Road crime scene, that's one hell of a coincidence in my book. But I can't prove there was a bullet sent with the Stine letter. And why should there have been? Because he sent a shirt piece. But
sure.
Maybe to connect himself to the earlier crimes, I don't know. He connected both crimes together in the first communications.
Yep.
With Berryessa, he did the writing on the car door. Maybe here he was connecting himself back to the initial crimes. I don't know. But it's just speculation on my part.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very interesting angle. If there was 2 essentially missing casings at the first 2 canonicals, I mean, I think that would be something that really has not been talked about at all, you know, other than you guys, you know, mentioning. Granted, not that there's anything concrete, as we said, but there could be more patterns like that are lesser known. You know what I mean? That's where I would go with that.
You would have thought a DOJ report would have got it bang on. But if you look at the police report, it mentions, was it Sergeant Silver and, what's his name? Haran or something. They collected 9 bullets from the crime scene. They didn't mention 9 casings from the crime scene. They didn't mention. So again, it wasn't just omitted from the DOJ report. It was omitted from the police report. Yet it was in the drawings. Yeah, that's what led me to believe it was separated in the Rambler.
Yeah, I like what you did there. I think that could be certainly something.
Sorry, did you want to go back to Blue Rock Springs?
No. Do you have anything else that you want to cover on BRS, or do you want to move on to the next one?
No, you're fine. I'll go where you want to go. Ross.
Let's go to Lake Berryessa. I think this is what got me down the rabbit hole of the Zodiac case. Of course, that scene in David Fincher's film, which I think is the most riveting, and this is like the most like ridiculous thing that I think has ever happened. But because of course the first 2 canonicals are extremely baffling and odd, but I just want to ask you what's different about Lake Berryessa, because it seems like quite a bit from these other canonicals, unless you're going all the way back to like Santa Barbara, which seems even more similar. And you know, we both don't have any concrete evidence there to say that that's Zodiac. Of course, you never claimed it. A daylight stabbing, you know, on this massive, lake that's basically essentially like a vacation spot. I'd just like to get your thoughts on, what you think is going on here. Of course, it seems Zodiac is trying to raise his stature with the media hype, and I guess essentially trying to outdo himself. But it seems quite different than the other canonicals, if you will. Of course, it's not a gun crime. So, what do you think here?
Well, I don't know if you've read what I've written about Snoozy and Furlong.
I don't believe so, but refresh me. I'll definitely look into it.
Well, my argument was this. This is why I sorry. I believe that if you remember, he had committed 3 murders, injured severely Michael Mageau, and he'd sent 3 cryptograms to 3 newspapers, as well as the August the 4th letter.
Mm-hmm.
And despite this, he still never got front page publicity with the Chronicle or the Examiner newspapers. One was relegated to page 4, one was relegated to page 9. And then along came the Snoozy and Furlong murders. Well, they'd already occurred on August the 3rd, but there was a full page spread in the Chronicle detailing their murders in great detail, a whole front page. And he must have thought to himself, I've done all these murders, written all these letters, I've done 3 cryptograms, and I'm relegated to page 4 and page 9. And yet the Snoozy and Furlong murders, here we are, front page. What do I have to do? And I think it's at this point he decided he would have to do a close quarter stabbing, which is obviously stabbings are more personal and brutal. And I think if it wasn't for the Snoozy and Furlong murders, I don't think he would have committed the Berryessa attack. And I think, my personal opinion, I think Cecilia Shepard's fate was sealed the moment he read that newspaper article on August the 6th. And that's why I think he turned up in a costume with a bigger knife than the one that was used on Snoozy and Furlong. And he did this simply for front page coverage, a more brutal close quarter attack. And that is why I believe he wrote by knife on the car door. It was obvious it was a knife murder, but I think he mentioned by knife to say, do I get front page coverage now, like the Snoozy Furlong murders? And that's why when the dripping pen card came along, he added 2 extra victims and put August. So that's what I believe was his inspiration for the Berryessa attack. And it might well have been him who turned up when the 3 girls from Pacific Union College were sunbathing.
Mm-hmm.
But for whatever reason, maybe 3 people were too much to handle. And that's why he turned his attention 2 hours later to Hartnell and Shepard. So that's why I think, plus the press and the interest that had been shown, what better way to turn up as an executioner in grand style? I think he was starting to believe his own press at that point. So I think the Snoozy Furlong murders were the inspiration for the Berryessa attack.
Yeah, I really like your angle on that. I think there could definitely be something there. And I believe you did reference that on the pod, if I'm not mistaken. How about the dentist and his son with the rifle, seeing the shabbily dressed man who kind of turns the other way when he sees the kid's gun? Do you think that could be either the Zodiac or the same guy as the lurker with the 3 girls?
I believe the lurker who spotted the 3 sunbathing girls and the Dr. Rayfield and his son, if you measure out the distances, they were 2 miles north of what was it called? The girls, it mentioned in the thing, they were 2 miles north of the, I forgot the name of the place. But if you measure out the distances of where it mentioned the girls were in relation to where they actually ended up sunbathing, and you measure the 0.8 miles from the crime scene where Dr. Rayfield and his son were, that turns out at the exact same place in Smittle Creek. So we have 2 unusual reportings of a strange man by Dr. Rayfield and his son and the 3 girls, and they were both at Smittle Creek in the identical place. And if their reports are correct and this man was roaming around, who was a bit unusual, and that he stuck out to them, I believe this was probably the Zodiac killer. And the Dr. Rayfield and his son probably saw the Zodiac killer after the murder, because I don't believe he was parked behind the Carmen Ghia. I think his car was just beyond where they were at Smittle Creek. And I think he walked to the crime scene. I think he was just trawling the hillsides. And this probably lines up a little bit better with the timing, which is why it took him a lot longer to get to the payphone at 7:40. From 6:30 to 7:40 is 1 hour and 10 minutes. And it wouldn't have, in my opinion, taken him that long to reach that payphone if he went there directly at Main Street. So I believe he walked to his car 20 minutes across the hillside, spotted by Dr. Rayfield and son, got in his car, then drove to the payphone. So I believe both of those people saw the Zodiac. But again, I wouldn't bet my life on it.
Sure, yeah. You had a lot of really good insights there. For one, yeah, I think that could be correct about seeing him after the crime. But for two, it was my understanding that did they not have tire tracks behind the Carmen Ghia? I thought there was some reason why they thought he had parked behind Brian's car.
There were tire tracks behind the Carmen Ghia, but when were they made?
Right, so it could have just been any.
Could have been any time, couldn't it? So.
Got you.
We can't put a fingerprint on what time those tracks were left. I'd like to know more of where the footprints went after it, got to the area. Did it extend beyond the Carmen Ghia to something beyond? I don't know where exactly those footprints started and ended exactly.
Right,
so,
right.
You get what I'm saying? If you park behind, those footprints could have extended, but I don't know what the ground surface was like where the cars were parked. It was probably obviously not the same as the surface walking down to the crime scene. So
sure.
Without knowing that, I couldn't say for certain.
Right. In other words, he could have crossed onto grass somewhere knowing that the trail would go off, blah, blah, blah.
Exactly, yeah.
You mentioned the by knife. When he sends his later, Slaves in Paradise letter, would you have that by knife on the car door, the by gun, by fire, by rope, by knife? Would you have that as a comic book connection to the Tim Holt Wheel of Death there? Or
do I believe that connection?
Yeah. Do you think he got it from the comic book and regurgitated it?
Absolutely. Yes. I know some people say that those sort of rota fortunes, I think they're called, Wheel of Fortunes, were not uncommon. They weren't unique to this Tim Holt comic book.
Right.
But it was red mask, and the skeleton had a reddy orange mask on. Does this sort of link it in? You've got the Lady Doom, Peekaboo, You're Doomed.
Yep.
To me, these three things together, I tend to believe that Tahoe's got this bang on. But your take is?
I agree. I mean, I think it's pretty convincing. I mean, of course, Dave Aranchak recently did his whole thing of the comic book references and whatnot. So I think there's definitely a lot there with the Batman and the Batman villain saying this is the Batman speaking. Of course, this is the Zodiac speaking. Let's pop back over to Berryessa just real quick, because the executioner hood that he puts on behind the tree, is that like his whole Lord High Executioner Coco from the Mikado? Is that a reenactment, or obviously besides the media hype, and as you stated in your previous theory, obviously it seems to have some meaning to himself. Otherwise, he could have dressed up as anything. You know what I mean?
Well, it's a hard one to say.
Yeah, right.
It could very well be, but I remember reading in that Snoozy Furlong, August the 6th, I think it was somebody called Hauser. I can't remember. The guy who did the autopsy said this was one of the worst crimes I've ever seen. It was like the Nazi sex slave mutilations. So I don't know whether he read that and thought, can I make this into even more of a fearsome event by dressing up when he went to Lake Berryessa? But also it had the double effect of concealing his identity. And let's be honest, he his intention in that crime wasn't necessarily to kill the victims, because he could have done that easily by slitting their throats or anything. I don't want to sound brutal, but he could have easily killed them if he had so chosen. So
he had the gun on him, so.
Well, exactly. I mean, of course, that would be a danger in daylight.
Yeah.
Possible
attention.
witnesses.
Yeah.
But, I don't want to sound horrible, but he could have slit their throat 10 times.
Right.
He didn't have to stab them in the back. And he must have known, he must have known that she was still alive when he left. I don't think the Zodiac's intention was ever to worry about whether he murdered the victims. I think it was primarily so he could get the attention through his letters and be taken seriously, because I think many of the victims were still alive when he left, even Darlene Ferrin, possibly David Faraday to a certain extent. We don't even know whether Betty Lou Jensen was still alive because her body shifted position. So I don't think his intention, obviously apart from Paul Stine, was primarily to worry whether he murdered the victims or not, because he could surely have done that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
No, carry on.
I agree with the assessment, and then I would say, like suffering as well. You know what I mean? Because as you said, the choice of the knife. You know what I mean? And also Lake Berryessa, of course, is the most back and forth conversation we have with, obviously because Brian Hartnell is a survivor, that we have a back and forth conversation with Zodiac and a victim. I just want to get your opinion on the whole. I'm an escaped prisoner from Deer Lodge, Montana. And then, of course, Hartnell had some trouble remembering the details, understandably so. Do you think that the Deer Lodge, Montana was a thing? I know that was kind of fed to Hartnell later after the officer. Do you think that has any significance, or is like that just his cover story where I'm going to tell them I'm fleeing from a prison and I'm on my way to Mexico? I just want to get your take on that.
Well, it was interesting because wasn't it the 19th of September when Carl Pierce and another inmate escaped from Montana prison by cutting through the fence?
Yep, exactly.
And they were recaptured. So whether the Zodiac killer, as Mike has pointed out, read this somewhere in the newspapers and thought, well, I'll use this as a cover story, I couldn't say. I don't know what your take on that connection is.
I mean, as you said, he clearly follows like true crime and is conscious of these other cases. So he appears to know that. Morph obviously brought this up on you guys' pod episode. So again, I would agree with Morph, as I don't know how common that news would be in Northern California at the time. So it was almost like he would have had to, either he follows like random crimes in every state, as you guys were saying, or he would have had some reason why he knows that, like spent time there or whatever, family members there or whatever, however he could have learned of that. You know what I mean? So it is super random and strange, but I'm always interested to just get other opinions on it.
And didn't say Deer Lodge. Was this put into his mouth by Sergeant John Robertson?
Yeah. I wonder if he even said that, or if he could have said someplace closer. Is just my thought.
Well, we have to report to Colorado, don't we, as well?
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So I don't know how much tack we can put into this Montana connection. Whether it's with the Colorado one, I don't know. It's two different versions.
For sure. Yeah, it's interesting. I would love to see if Hartnell could ever provide any clarification at some point. I'm sure it'd be extremely difficult. I'm not like expecting him to just figure it out randomly. But do you have anything else on Lake Berryessa, or would you like to move on to Paul Stine?
No, we can move on to Paul Stine if you want.
Yeah, we have kind of gone in and out of Paul Stine because it gets all this hoopla, because obviously it's quite a bit different than those northern Bay Area. I'd say those are more suburban crimes. Obviously, like Lake Berryessa is like in the middle of nowhere, but Napa. But Paul Stine is like, it's downtown in the Presidio, so it's quite a bit strange. I mean, my whole thing on it was because of the fact that he was he had like these male survivors, so obviously Avery and these other kind of people were taunting him about like, you're killing these like, little girls, and you know what I mean? You're like,
Yes.
about him not being a real man. So it seems like he decided to target a single man. And then, as you said, you have multiple witnesses after the crime. So, if you want to consider like Cecilia a witness at Lake Berryessa because she saw him from afar, but as far as people seeing him like without a hood on, you know what I mean? It's definitely Paul Stine at the Presidio. I just like want to get your take on it because there's the whole thing about Stine having the same birthday as Alan, and this whole theory that Stine is targeted. They always try to make this argument that the rest of these are random killings and Stine was the real target, and the other ones are just to throw people off the trail. I mean, I don't know how much there is there, but there seems, the Stine one seems to be particularly peculiar from all the reasons you mentioned, including the cutting of the shirt and the mailing it in after the fact. So just wherever you are at on Stine.
Well, I've just written about this recently in the sense that you're right. It mentioned he targeted couples because he felt, he was frustrated that people were having relationships. They mentioned it was a sex killing. He did it for sexual gratification, all this sort of stuff. They described the Berryessa attack as piquerism, which is, the art of penetrating the skin to get a sexual thrill. And there's a good chance that all this drove him to target a lone taxi cab driver in San Francisco to show that he wasn't just targeting women. He didn't target the women more. He wasn't sexually motivated. And that's why I believe he probably targeted Paul Stine, because of the incessant newspaper articles that essentially provoked him into this attack, but also the fact that in his early letters on July the 31st, he did mention he would target lone people in the night. So maybe it's something he always had in mind, that he would target somebody in San Francisco because of the sheer publicity that would generate. So it could be a combination of both of those things. In terms of, was Stine specifically targeted? I don't see how that's possible.
Right.
If we believe that Stine got a dispatch to East 500 or somewhere, East 9th, can't remember the exact address. At some point, the Zodiac killer either flagged him down, and maybe he was going the same way and thought, well, I can take this fare as well. I don't see, unless somebody knew what taxicab Stine would be in advance of October the 11th or that day, to then specifically hang around waiting for Stine to turn up randomly, because he'd been to the airport previously. So I don't really see how this is possible. I know people who push this idea because they believe of certain suspects knew Paul Stine, but I think this is a bit of a stretch. I don't know what your take is on it.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a stretch. I mean, if we're going anywhere with the multiple killer theory, Graysmith says in the yellow cover book that apparently Stine was like robbed by two men previously to the murder. So it's been floated that could have been a dry run to the murder attack. I mean, I'm not sure how much sense that makes. In my opinion, that general address that you named where the fair starts, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, that comes out of the theater district, right? So yes. My theory is that like Zodiac was coming from the Mikado or some other theater performance, and then kind of rides off that way. And then, as you and many other people have stated, of course, taxi drivers are crime targets or even murder targets, because for one, you can pick the address where you're sending to, so you can get them to go wherever you want. They're usually by themselves. So it's a bit all over the place, as you said. And then, I mean, I find the Washington and Cherry or Washington and Maple addresses very peculiar, because you have this highfalutin neighborhood of the Presidio, and then the original location is the school, and of course they go further up to the next block or corner, right? So it's quite baffling. And then you add the whole Falcon Zelms thing after him walking out and running off into the park, makes it even more strange to me. And of course, this is where we get that composite sketch that you see everywhere. So it's pretty wild.
I don't know whether you've looked into the spilling out times for the theatre in the theatre district by Union Square, but if it's anything like over here, you would be probably exiting the evening performance at around 9:30, which would fit in with the time of somebody taking in a show, then getting a taxi to the crime scene. But we don't actually know that he had a car parked in that area. A lot of people believe he may have lived in Presidio Heights. So where do you think the original idea came that he had a car parked in the area and made his way to Union Square to then later get a taxi back in a predetermined kill?
Sure, that's a great point. Of course, like Zodiac uses a car in basically every canonical, so a lot of people bring up the car connection quite often. Even if he did escape in the Presidio, he obviously had some way to get out of the city. If we're expecting him to be, in the North Bay area, Vallejo is quite a bit north of the city. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I would have to probably look into it more, but I could see something being there. It would be difficult for me to pin down the exact escape route, because it's just, again, this Paul Stine one is probably the second strangest canonical crime after Lake Berryessa. I mean, I would also say increasing risk with the last two canonical crimes, with Lake Berryessa being daylight and then Paul Stine being essentially downtown San Francisco.
I mean, we all probably believe that the Zodiac killer chose Washington and Maple because if you look at the geography of that area, it's much better to murder somebody there than it is at Washington and Cherry. So it's probably a fair bet that that's where his original intention of murder was. But, and again, there was no shot heard at Washington and Cherry. So there's a big debate on whether the murder was actually committed there and somehow he took the cab one block later. I'm not so sure about that, but it seems if it was Washington and Maple, his original intention, and his exit was up Maple, out of view, he'd have turned right when he got to Jackson and Maple, and one block further would have been Spruce Street, where he was seen entering the park. So this maybe was his original intention from the very off. But I mean, I don't know if you disagree with me here, but I always thought he did enter the park and headed off towards Broadway or the Leon Steps and probably got in a vehicle around that area, because when he mentioned in the bus bomb letter, he said the motorcycles went by traveling from south to northwest, about 150 feet away. And that marries up with, I think it's Presidio Boulevard, those woods just on the outskirts, on the eastern edge. That would marry up with a road heading from south to northwest. So that's where I probably believe he exited the park and got into a vehicle. I know Rex Bolt also believes that the Zodiac got into a car, maybe on the eastern side of the park, because after committing the murder, if anything went wrong, he'd want to commit a murder near an area where he could vanish into just in case things went wrong. In other words, he had a backup plan, and this was the ideal scenario to then get straight over the Golden Gate Bridge and out of San Francisco within about 10 minutes. So I think it was totally predetermined. The question is, why didn't he just order a taxi cab to Washington and Maple and just hop in, kill the guy and get out again, rather than all the shenanigans of going into town, back out again and doing the murder that way round?
Yeah, 100%. I agree. I don't disagree with him disappearing into the park. I think that probably is most likely what happened. I don't like to believe everything Zodiac wrote in the letters, because we know he exaggerated and completely flew off the handle at times. But in that case, I think it's probably likely. I think I would add one more thing. Now, the Falcon Zelm story is so convoluted, but at one point, I believe it's either them or someone else mentions that if I'm not getting this completely wrong and butchering it, but that they thought he walked up the steps into one of the Presidio households. So my thought is perhaps he walked up, like, if this did happen, and pretended he was going into his house or whatever, and then turned around and maybe dipped into the park from there. You know what I mean? If that is a thing. If not, who knows? Again, this is why it's an unsolved crime.
Well, in the documentary, he said he last saw him going up the steps, didn't see him get to the top of the steps.
Right.
And we know in the memorandum on November the 12th, he mentioned he last saw him heading north up the north end of Maple. They're about 100 feet apart. So he can't see him in both places. That's impossible. Because once he saw him up those steps and he didn't see him get to the top, that suggests when he departed the scene, Donald Fouke, the Zodiac was still going up those steps. So he can't then see him 100 feet further down the road if he's went past him. So I don't believe that one about the steps. I'd rather believe the one where he last saw him going up Maple. But that may have been a feign by the Zodiac killer. You know, once he'd got stopped and questioned, in my opinion, he went on, he turned left, and then when the cops drove away, he then came back out and walked down to Spruce. That's my take on it. Right.
Yeah, I think it's something in that range. I totally agree. I know that the descriptions of that story have just changed multiple times, and it's become increasingly more confusing. But yeah, I think it's something like that. Like he perhaps pretended to go up these steps and then dipped in the park. Of course, you're dealing with this foggy kind of hillside at nighttime, so other than the car headlights, I'm not sure how much you can get a clear view of any of this. You know what I mean? I have been in the area myself a few times.
And I was going to say, in the This Is a Zodiac Speaking documentary, he mentions getting the amended description off Armand Palisetti at the top of Cherry. Whereas in the 1989 Crimes of the Century documentary, he mentions getting the update as he was heading towards Arguello Boulevard.
Right.
So something's wrong here. I'd rather go with the 89 one than the 2007 one.
Sure. And I know you guys did an in-depth deep dive of that, of the pod, which was excellent. Again, guys, Zodiac Speaking, wherever you get podcasts. I think that's pretty much all I got on the canonicals. One thing I did want to mention that you guys brought up, this is kind of switching gears slightly so the audience knows, is one that you guys covered on the pod, which I am not familiar with. I think you guys both kind of landed on the side that you didn't think this was Zodiac activity, but this was the whole Rodriguez thing, the Hispanic couple on the highway with the 22. I only recently started looking into that, so it is a rather peculiar crime. If we could just get your brief general thoughts on it.
The one in Alameda County?
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yes, Mike brought this up years ago. If you're asking my opinion on whether it could be the Zodiac killer, I highly doubt it.
Yeah.
I think it's more likely to be somebody related to one of the people involved, because they were having an affair for about 10 years.
Okay, I got you.
And my opinion of that is either it's connected to all them malicious phone calls and the person stalking them in the run-up to their murders. Whether any of the other family members were involved in this, I don't know, and it'd be foolish of me to say.
Sure.
But no, I don't think this has got anything to do with the Zodiac killer. I did mention that they could have easily compared, well, if you're going to put the .22 things, they could have compared the shell casings, in my opinion. Okay, could have switched weapons, but I don't think there's enough to go on in this crime.
Sure.
All we basically have is two people being shot by Sunol Park, and one person, being shot at Sunol Park, the other guy, Valasitos Road. So I don't think there's enough on this to really say. I don't know what your opinion on the whole podcast was, but it's really difficult because you're just dealing with small newspaper articles, and you can't really take this much further. So I don't know what your
great. Yeah, I mean, I thought you guys did an excellent deep down breakdown on the deep dive breakdown on the pod. I mean, I was very interested in the case and what you guys had to say, but of course, there's also like I feel like there's a lot of similar crimes in the Sacramento area with like those type of highway murders with possibly using a 22. So again, there's the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders. I know that's a little bit different, but Graysmith tries to loop that in his second book, of course. So I kind of felt the same way you guys felt. Like I think with more information, we might be able to do more with it. But it was highly interesting. You guys had my full attention, but I definitely wouldn't. I don't think it's quite as convincing as Swindles or Davis or Lompoc or any of that other stuff. But I definitely would be interested if more were to come out about that, you know what I mean? Just to see if it could go in any other direction.
I think it's difficult to take it any further without any police reports. They've probably all been lost, according to Mike, or mislaid. Sure. I don't see, other than scavenging around for newspaper articles, which are less than accurate a lot of the time, whether we can take it any further. But I agree with you. I think all the earlier crimes you've just mentioned are more likely to be Zodiac than these two crimes. Sure. This one and the one in 1975 that we mentioned.
Sure.
So.
Yes, absolutely. Again, I just, I don't think really with the resources available, any of us can really do much with it, but it was a highly entertaining episode of the podcast. So I'll give you guys that. Let's go to, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, you were pretty much out on Kathleen Johns or Donna Lass being Zodiac activity. Let's just break down your thoughts on that briefly, if you could.
Which one do you want?
Well, let's go with Kathleen Johns, because that's, he claims in his letter that I gave a rather interesting ride to a woman and her baby. Does he phrase it something like that?
Yes. This crime I've always been a bit up in the air on, really. If I had to plumb one way or the other, I'd say no. But what I found curious was in the Modesto B, it mentioned she left her home at San Bernardino home at 4 p.m. But I remember when she was the Zodiac book by Robert Graysmith, she stated, well, according to Robert Graysmith, that she left her home in San Bernardino at 7 p.m. because it was easier to take the kids at night because they were asleep. But we know she was in a bit of a clunker of a car, she described, 1957 Chevrolet, I think. And there's no way, well, it would have taken her at least 7 hours to get to Highway 132. So if she'd have left her home at 7, you can see she would have reached Highway 132 at about 2 in the morning and then had to go straight to the police station. So there would have been no time for a kidnapping. But if obviously she left at 4, then yes, a kidnapping could have happened. But what I find curious, and I know Jean Quasar mentioned this, that she escaped into vineyards, which are by South Bird Road. And that area on Highway 132, the only vineyards I could find alongside Highway 132, is only about 200 odd meters from where her car was found disabled, which means whoever abducted her took her around for 1.5, 2 hours, and she ended up back exactly the same place as she left. That doesn't sound like much of an abduction. And when the guy brought her back to exactly where she started, assuming these descriptions are right by Robert Graysmith, that she escaped into vineyards, but there is an on and off ramp there and an intersection, and that there is vineyards exactly as described in the book. So I don't know what your take is on this one, but I would give it a very slim chance of being Zodiac. Whether or not she experienced something unpleasant, I don't know. But she did suggest that initially the guy was friendly, and I always found it unusual that when the guy snapped her keys because she left them in the car, why she didn't just ask for them back if he was friendly with her. And then she went on to report later that the guy was saying all sorts of evil things, and so there was two contradicting stories.
Right.
So I'd give it a slim chance. I don't know what sort of percentage, as low as 5% on this being a Zodiac crime. And it's not unusual that he would admit to it, because there was no chance really that this was going to get solved. And after all, she did
Right.
identify him. So it's why look a gift horse in the mouth? You may as well accept it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, for one, when Morph came on with myself and my friend Ned DeHaan of Black Box Online Radio, I proposed to him the lighting of the car on fire. You know, that being a by fire crime to go along with his little diagram that he drew, so he could hit all aspects of the by gun, by knife, by fire, by rope. My I personally think that something did happen to her. Whether or not that was the Zodiac in the car with her would be difficult for me to say. Of course, she gets back to the station and she sees the composite sketch and says that was him. And then, if I'm not mistaken, she later identifies Lawrence Kane, which is a bit odd because she said that this guy was dressed in military style dress pants and dress shoes. I mean, I don't really know if that was a thing that Lawrence Kane would ever be dressed like that, if there's really anything to even put him in that area. So I think something happened to her. Again, if it's another taking credit for something that he didn't do situation like Riverside activity, or again Donna Lass, it'd be difficult for me to say. But it further complicates the whole Zodiac debacle.
And if you remember in the police report, she described her abductor as 30 years of age, and Lawrence Kane was 45 years of age in 1970. So
Sure.
That's a blatant contradiction there. But
Sure.
I know she was probably pushed into the Lawrence Kane angle by Harvey Hines. So
Right.
I don't put much credence in the Lawrence Kane connection. But there's a 15-year discrepancy in what she's claiming in the police report and later statements to Harvey Hines.
But, yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if you. What's your thoughts on Donna Lass then?
Yeah, I was just coming to that. So one thing that I consider Richard Grinnell to be an expert on is these later Zodiac correspondence, communications, whatever you like to call them. So the Donna Lass thing, it's quite baffling to me. Of course, there's the Sierra Club letter. This whole in the pines thing. I'm not sure what much we can do with that, because it's apparently a clearing in the wilderness. And I know people have gone to try to look for this location and have dogs, bring bloodhounds to sniff out the location and stuff like that. I'm not sure what came of it. I mean, my problem with the Donna Lass thing is Zodiac is not really known for kidnapping anyone or really ever touching or removing the bodies, other than Stine, that was just in a car. Unless we're going to go all the way back to Santa Barbara, where the bodies were dragged into the shack. And as we said, we don't have enough there to do it. So I don't know. Donna Lass, it just seems like another Sherry Joe Bates situation of just taking credit for sake of keeping the narrative going in the letters, But I mean, what's your take? Do you at least have the correspondence being authentic, and then once again he's just researching these Northern California crimes and working himself into the story?
Well, I believe the Pines card is 100% authentic, but the murder of the disappearance of Donna Lass, possible murder, we assume she's probably been murdered. Right. Absolutely no chance. What I would say, there's no fingerprints or DNA in this case. So I would, and she was called out of town for a family emergency. Right. And her family lived in Sioux Falls, which was about 1,500 miles away. So I agree with Mike. This person probably knew her, knew that this sort of reporting of a family illness would buy a lot of time for him. But one thing that convinces me this isn't Zodiac is if you go back to the July the 26th Little List letter, and in it he says, I wanted you to wear some nice Zodiac buttons, or if not, some nasty ones. And then he wrote in the future tense at the start of the letter about the victims he wanted to torture for his slaves in paradise, stating, "Some I shall tie over anthills," going on to quote the Mikado, "Someday it'll happen." So here you've got the mention of some and his insinuation that he wants to target his slaves in the afterlife. And then if you move forward from this letter to the 13-hole postcard, he said, "Some of them fought. It was horrible," using the past tense. So it's effectively, it's a continuation of the same theme, which is why I believe the 13-hole postcard is definitely the Zodiac killer, because he was just saying some of them fought. In other words, he was torturing them and then they fought. And if you know, you obviously know the dates of these letters, and in between these two letters was the disappearance of Donna Lass, and he never upped his victim count from 13 from the little list letter to 13-hole postcard. So he wasn't even claiming her himself, which is why later in the Pines card he didn't claim 12 victims and get it wrong, as people say. He said sought victim 12. And what he was saying was sought being the past participle of seek. So he was saying he wouldn't sought her. And if you remember there was 10 victims on April the 20th, there were 12 in the button letter. She left San Francisco on June the 5th before the button letter. So by claiming he sought her, all he's doing is tying her disappearance in Lake Tahoe with his last murder back to the Stine murder, because he would have easily read in the newspapers in September the itinerary of where she worked, what date she worked, where she works at the Letterman General Hospital. And just by saying he sought her back then in the Presidio, he's basically tying himself to both locations.
Right.
And that's why I believe he wrote sought victim 12, because it ties in between where he claimed 10 and 12. And Donna Lass was still in San Francisco at that time. So that's one reason why I believe it's genuine.
Yeah, I think you could be right on that. And you guys did an excellent deep dive on this on the podcast of her background and her previous roommates, her previous employment, as well as the interview that Morph did with her friend that knew her, that came to meet her at around the same timeline. So I'm just wondering, given his use of the word sought, and then her location of being in the San Francisco area, do you think there's any possibility that he perhaps could have, maybe they didn't know each other, but maybe he knew who she was? Or do you think it's just purely most likely he would have read it in the newspapers after the fact?
No, I think it came out in the newspapers. I think it was September the 27th, somewhere around there. All these details are available to him. So I just believe he basically stole it and designed the card from what he read in the newspapers, including Sierra, which was mentioned in the newspapers. But I don't believe the Pines card was a burial site. I don't know if you've seen on my site. I just think if you stick the card where it says Sierra Club over Claire Tappan Lodge, which was a Sierra Club for members only back then, the circle falls over the Donna Memorial. And I've said before, it's so similar to the Monticello card, which we haven't seen, where that says short victims 21. It uses exactly the same technique to retrospectively claim the murder of Kathy Biek. So he used the same technique in both instances to retrospectively claim a victim.
Sure.
So that's why I believe it's genuine. Mainly, I believe it's genuine because of its connection to the Monticello card. Right.
How, I believe you guys covered it on the pod. How about this thing? Does Donna's family not receive this letter later on of Saint Donna or whatever it said?
Guardian of the Pines.
That seems to be a peculiar thing. You think there's anything there? Think that's Zodiac, or is it just a random thing?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, it was mailed on December the 27th. But it was so short in nature. But what the only thing I did find was the directions on the Pines card. You know, past Lake Tahoe areas, peek through the pines.
Yeah.
If you drop down on Google Maps, I don't know if it's still the same image now. If you drop down on Google Maps on the Donna Pass Road and look through, you can see Clare Tappan Lodge in the distance, and you'll see snow-covered pines, and it mirrors the image in that Guardian of the Pines letter sent to Donna Lassie's sister.
Mm-hmm.
So that isn't proof, of course, but I just thought that was an uncanny little connection. But there's not enough to go on there, really. Guardian of the Pines, Saint Donna. What was he invoking saint for? I've tried to search for this millions of times, and I can't find where he got this inspiration, if it was the Zodiac killer. What are your thoughts on this letter? I mean, this postcard.
Yeah, it's strange. It's like that family Morph mentioned that received the random baseball tickets. You know what I mean? I feel like it's like another one of those kind of situations where I mean, I guess if he did the in the Pines card, and then I guess maybe that was him sending the family the letter taunting them, because it seems like that could be a Zodiac type of thing to do. He's obviously an unhinged lunatic. It would be pretty difficult for me to pin it down exactly what's going on there. What I would like to get into, or just starting with the Exorcist letter, and how he goes out on this quoting of the Lord High Executioner, the Mikado, the Titwillow quote I'm referring to. You know, people have speculated that obviously it's like him fading away, and then, you know, people have jumped to the conclusion that perhaps he's like terminally ill and he's dying, or he's going to commit suicide. Do you think that quote like meant anything, or is it just purely him quoting the Mikado as his final sign off?
I think he's just quoting the Mikado again. If you look at the if he ever intended to commit suicide, why would he write, if I don't see this note in your paper, I'll do something nasty, which, you know, I'm capable of doing? It doesn't sound like a guy to me who's about to commit suicide.
Right.
So carry on.
Or the terminally ill theory. Do you think he could have had any health problem, or is that just a random, like nothing?
I don't know why he quoted. I don't know why he quoted the Mikado again. It must have some meaning.
Right.
But what? Because he said signed yours truly, then quoted the Mikado excerpt. So is there a clue to his name in there? I don't know. But why write signed yours truly, and then he plunged himself into a billowy wave and all that sort of stuff? Why did he do that? Surely signed truly should have been at the bottom of the letter.
Sure. Yeah. People try to interpret the plunging into the billowy wave of, you know, all the things that I just mentioned. So you have some amazing breakdowns and comparisons of these later letters, and you in fact believe that a lot of this later correspondence is authentic Zodiac correspondence. So maybe if you could just give like a synopsis of, you know, why you think that is. Clearly it's the handwriting comparison that you have posted on your website. I know Zodiac are all over the place on this. You know, I'm sure there's tons of people that disagree with you, but I think you have a great angle here. So just take it away.
I'm not a great fan of handwriting analysis. I think it's useful when a later letter comes in and it mimics something that hasn't been released previously.
Right.
That's why I focused heavily on the envelopes. That's how you can prove the Exorcist letter is genuine.
Sure.
Because, you know, that you've probably read that bit about the San Fran Chronicle. It matches perfectly the Dragon card, which hadn't been released to the public, the envelope. And if you compare the Dragon card envelope, San Fran Chronicle, with the Exorcist letter, it's virtually identical. So that to me proves that the Exorcist letter is genuine. If you look at the April the 20th one, it's the only 2 times he ever used that address. And the Zodiac mimicked that in the Exorcist letter, when he could have easily mimicked what was available to him, which was the Dripping Pen card envelope. But he didn't do that. He mimicked something that had never been released.
Right.
Now, I mean, if you're talking about outlier letters, are you thinking about something like the 87 letter?
Yeah, I'm thinking about the whole sequence because, right, at some point, don't they? There's the Tashi debacle, and they try to say he was writing letters praising himself,
Yeah,
and then they attempt. Is that the 78 or is that 87
that's
when they?
78, but
Mhm.
I went to the 87 letter.
Sure, sure.
That's the one about the Halloween night and the movie The Car.
Yep.
Do you remember it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, my argument was that he'd only ever written once up to 1987 to the Vallejo Times Herald, and
Mhm,
that envelope had never been released. In fact, it was lost for quite a long time.
mhm,
And my argument was, well, let's take it like if you were the hoaxer of that, they claimed the hoaxer of the 87 letter copied the 78 letter. To me, that made no sense. Why would you copy one of the only widely reported hoax letters? Surely you'd copy something
mhm.
that was deemed to be genuine. You wouldn't copy a hoax letter to convince somebody you were real.
Sure.
But my argument was, if you sat down in 1987, say you, Ross, in California, and wanted to mimic what was on the envelope of the of the 1969 Vallejo Times Herald envelope, which you had no access to, you could never have seen it. What's the chances that you would write exactly the same 13 words on the envelope of the 87 letter that mimics the 69 letter? You would also use no punctuation on either of them. The 87 letter had no punctuation, no commas, no full stops, exactly like the 69 Vallejo Times Herald envelope, which had, again, never been published.
Mhm.
And also, what are the chances you'd spell Herald with an O, just like the 1969? Now, I can't prove that the 87 envelope has Herald spelt with an O, but I'd put a sound bet on it, because the Celebrity Cipher on September the 25th, 1990, also spelt Herald with an O. That would mean he only wrote to the Vallejo Times Herald 3 times, and every time he spelt Herald with an O. Not to mention he got no punctuation in both, the 87 and the 69, and he used the same 13 words. And if you have a look at the 87 envelope and look at the way he does write the V, it heavily overhangs the A in Vallejo,
Mhm.
exactly like the 69 letter. And I don't know how somebody can fluke all this if they're not the same author and they knew what the original envelope looked like, which led me to believe that the Zodiac kept copies of everything he ever wrote and sent to the newspapers. Otherwise, doing that from memory 18 years later would have been very difficult.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So, I mean, of course, we have Exorcist, and then what follows that? I know we have the red Phantom letter. Then we have the 78 thing, 87, as you mentioned, and
86,
you good.
and the 86 letter.
Yeah, and you have them. What you have, what you believe is authentic correspondence going to 2001. Is that correct? Or
Well, I would only go certainly up to 80. The 86 and 87
okay,
letter, I believe, is 100% genuine.
okay, got you.
As the 78 letter, I believe, is 100% genuine as well.
I think so too.
Uh,
Good.
but yeah, after that, I do believe the 2001 card's genuine, and I do believe the Eureka card is, but I wouldn't put my life on either of those two. You can't really prove it. I know I did a little comparison between, the 90125 that he wrote. He used a different address style, and when he wrote the 2001 card, the 2001 letter, he used the same address style as he did the 1990 Eureka card, but that wasn't released till 2007.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why a copycat would use a completely new style of address. Why not copy something that was available to him, which he didn't do?
Absolutely. I'm going to go ahead and agree with you on the Eureka card. I think that one is as you said. I mean, there's like through almost all of these, nearly. I mean, I don't know them as well as you, but through almost all of these, there's this movie theme of the Mikado is more of a theater performance in a movie, but of course there are film versions of it. The Gilbert and Sullivan, but you have the Exorcist quote later on. You have like the Red Phantom. You have the car thing that you mentioned, and then with Eureka, you have the Groucho Marx sunglasses, or what? Not sunglasses, but the Groucho Marx mustache and glasses on the snowman. And And I want to ask you about, let me get this right, Chester Clark Klingel. You guys deep dive this on the podcast, Zodiac Speaking, wherever you get podcasts. And the keys that are what, the lockbox found, is that with the Eureka card? I just want to get your thoughts on it, because it's pretty much either like Zodiac knew this guy and stole the keys and or found them, or that guy just lost them and Zodiac randomly picked them up off the ground. So I just want to get on that.
Well, I really liked the forum post by Nin that I spoke about.
Mm-hmm.
That he must have known Chester Clark Klingel, because I think Nin made a great point when he said, why did he photocopy the keys? What was the point? Why didn't he draw some? Why didn't he just give the numbers out?
Right.
There has to be some meaning behind that photocopying. And when Nin said, you know, the inventor of the photocopying process was Chester Carlson, I thought that's a really good coincidence.
Yep.
Maybe a hint to the name, because I think the dripping pen card gave a hint to a name, as did the Halloween card, as did the Pines card, as did the Monticello card. And that's why I probably believe the Eureka card's genuine, because that too was giving a hint to the name of Chester. Now,
sure,
again, can't prove that, but there's 5 cards he mailed. And to me, in my opinion, all of them were giving us a clue to the name of the person he was speaking about in the cards, like the Pines card, as I just mentioned, the Monticello card, Kathy Biek, the dripping pen card, I think was a clue to Daniel Williams. And Kathy Biek in the Monticello card, I've already said that. And Chester Carlson was the clue to Chester Clark Klingel. So there's a running theme going all the way back to 1969 on these cards of giving us a clue to somebody's name. And I actually said this in the Halloween card, you know, I'll clue you in. I think these are all clues to the name, and you just had to sort of decipher these cards. I think they were very cleverly designed. And that's one reason why I believe this Eureka card was genuine. And he must have known Chester Clark Klingel either through business dealings or come across him in some capacity. But again, he got a lot of things right. And Chester Clark Klingel lived in Eureka, and this card was mailed from Eureka. I think this is a fair shout. He was trying to frame Chester Clark Klingel.
Sure.
But I don't know what your take is. Do you agree with that? Or do you think... I can't see how we can just find the keys, because you can't roll up to some post office and ask them the identity of the keys, can you?
Right, exactly. I think you're 100%, because again, it's pretty much either he knew him, like I said, or finds him randomly, and even then, how do you connect everything the way that you just laid it out? I mean, I guess is Chester Clark Klingel the key to this whole thing, if we were able to deep dive his known associates, because that's like the only kind of named person we have that, you know, perhaps would have maybe known the Zodiac. So that's why I really enjoyed that episode when you guys deep dived it on the pod.
And they didn't take DNA directly from Chester Clark Klingel, did they? So they took it only from disposed items.
Right.
So they don't know that that DNA they've got was Chester Clark Klingel.
Yeah, that's there's a lot of issues with the DNA, as that recent news with the stamp as well. So it kind of further convolutes the Zodiac mystery, as if the Zodiac mystery needed that. But I really like your take on the letters. I think you do a really good breakdown of that. Just briefly, I'm not, again, you're my correspondence expert. The stuff that comes from Rochester, New York later on, and I think it is, I don't even know which cipher that is, to be honest with you, if it's the My Name Is or whatever. But do you think there was anything with the Rochester, New York connection, out of curiosity? Because I know people constantly bring that up and ride that, and for me, it's kind of just like a random thing. I can't really make anything of it.
What do you mean, Rochester? Do you mean the Albany letter?
Yes, the Albany letter. That's the one I'm in.
Yes, I believe that's genuine.
Okay.
But I've pointed this out, but I don't believe the Zodiac mailed 4 cryptic communications, I believe he mailed 8.
Okay.
The 2 Fairfield letters, I believe, were genuine, and the 148 character cipher and letter in 71 was, in my opinion, definitely genuine. And I don't know if you remember, but a very boxy style was the 148 character cipher and letter, very geometric shapes, just like the Albany letter. And I said to Mike, not many people sending cryptograms, and not many people sending cryptograms pretending to be the Zodiac killer. And yet here we have the ciphertext character 7 in both of these cryptograms from 1971 and 1973 that both represented the letter A in plain text. And I said to him, what are the chances of this?
Right.
I find that hard to believe that 2 separate people pretending to be Zodiac, totally unrelated to each other, would send in very similar styled cryptograms with the number 7, which the Zodiac had never used before, that both represented the plaintext character A. And this, to me, binds it together because of the reasons I believe the 148 character cipher and letter are genuine. Therefore, the Albany letter is genuine too. And there was also similar language in the 2001 letter that mirrored the Albany letter. So I think these are all interconnected, but I don't go out my way to verify every communication that everyone I come across. I have to have good reason, and it's not on handwriting. And I've proved that because I've said consistently I don't believe the SLA letter and Red Phantom letter are the Zodiac at all. So I don't just try and verify everything.
Sure, absolutely. So my final question on Albany then was, does Zodiac have some connection to New York State? Like he spent time there or like something like that, because it comes up a lot. And, Northern California is a far cry from New York State. It's obviously the East Coast where I'm from. I don't know. I know Tom Voigt has mentioned that in the 60s, there was this practice of remailing where you could, mail something from somewhere and it gets remailed from elsewhere. I'm far from an expert on that, but do you think it's some sort of connection to New York State, or would it be like a remailing thing?
Well, I don't know about the remailing thing.
Right.
I mean, what are the chances? I don't know. What would be the benefit? Who's going to catch you just by sending a letter from the middle of San Francisco? Why would you need to remail it?
Sure.
What can you give away in that letter? Obviously, back then he didn't know about DNA. As long as you just seal it with gloves and send it, I don't see the point in why you'd need to remail anything. But in terms of this letter from Albany, he could easily have had relations there, just visited for the week. Who knows? That's why we were looking at where the origins of the Zodiac came from, whether it was Oklahoma, whether it was New York.
Right.
Does he have relations? Does he have friends here? We have the Atlanta connection, all over on the east side of America. So there's many reasons to believe he visited this area, maybe possibly frequently, and just mailed a couple of letters here and there while he was over there and then returned. So it's anybody's guess on any connection to New York, especially because this is after his main mailings in 1969 and 70. So it's not before, it's after. Therefore, he could easily have just been visiting. Who knows?
Sure. And that's my thought on the Eureka thing as well. Like it's kind of random. And then you have Klingel up there as well. And
why are people mailing things so far removed from the main Zodiac mailings? It makes you wonder whether they are genuine. And also people talk about a gap in the Zodiac mailings from 71 to 73, but we don't know that. Because as I pointed out, Robert Prouty, a documents examiner in 87, said he was getting 15 a year, hoax letters. But I don't know how you determine whether, other than just looking at handwriting, how can you determine whether a letter is a hoax or not? Any more than the phone calls they were getting, they kept calling them hoaxes. Well, how do you know?
I agree.
So I always said, look at the John Benet Ramsey case. How many people think that was Patsy's handwriting? How many people said it wasn't Patsy's handwriting? What I always said was, who gets the final say? Who's the king arbiter on these letters? Because even Morrill, Prouty, and John Shimoda disagreed with each other.
Sure.
So who gets the final say on what's authentic? And
Yeah,
also,
yeah, I agree.
and we've had 50 years of learning about these communications since they were mailed. And I think we've learned a lot about these communications in the intervening 50 years.
Sure. Well, it's like, if it's just letters on a page, that's one thing. But if it had some detailed drawing, like the dripping pen card, it's fairly obvious that, that Zodiac could draw, at least appears so. Can I get your opinion on Arthur Lee Allen getting that that ticket? Was it a speeding ticket or whatever on the day that the Pleasanton letter is mailed? Like, coincidence, or do you think there, it's been this theory that floated that Allen could be the letter runner? I'm just wondering if you are you either way on that?
I probably believe it's coincidence, because I don't think there's any hope whatsoever that Arthur Lee Allen was a Zodiac killer. You've got DNA in this case, whether it's a full DNA profile or whether it's a partial. You've got DNA because the 78 letter, according to the 1998 DNA chart, said DNA was obtained. And unless we just assume these people were bumbling fools, I would like to believe they knew what they were doing. And also, of course, we've got the fingerprint on the cab, which I believe was a Zodiac killer as well. So I think most of these suspects who have got their fingerprints on file can be ruled out. So any connection with this date of Arthur Lee Allen is just coincidence, because we get dates thrown around left, right, and center by people, and there's always going to be coincidences with dates.
Right.
They say, you get a certain amount of people in a room and you can guarantee that two people have the same birth date. So it's, to me, I don't put much credence in that.
Like Stine and Allen.
Well, yeah,
Just an example.
You see multiple examples over the internet where people have linked one date to another, and linked numbers into the writing on the car door, numbers into Gaikowski's birthday, numbers here, there, and everywhere.
Yeah.
It's not difficult to do. You can turn the Halloween card into virtually anything you choose, because you just count up the eyes. You can, you've seen it done a million times. It's such a versatile card, and so many of these things are, that it's not difficult to attach some things to your suspect, including Arthur Lee Allen.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I don't think Allen was the Zodiac. I mean, I do believe that it's possible that the Zodiac could have known Allen and perhaps tried to frame him, like what you said about Chester Clark Quingle. What was I going to say on that? Like the thing they pushed in the movie about Allen or the Zodiac supposedly calling Belli on Allen's birthday. Like, they pushed that super hard in the movie, and then it turned out like Tashi knew in real life that was obviously not the case, so it went nowhere. It's just one example. I only have two more things for you because I don't want to ruin your day out there in the beautiful UK. But one of my favorite things, I call this the other stuff section. One of my favorite episodes of the Zodiac Speaking podcast is when I'm going to go back to Fred Manalli and the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders. The classified post of Zodiac, your partners in deep real estate, the Imperial Wizard. That's the weirdest thing, and maybe it's tangential, maybe it's not related in any way. Of course, it does say the word Zodiac. I'm sure there was a lot of weird posts back then in the 60s and 70s. But as you guys deep dived and covered it on the pod, Fred Manalli, he dies in that car accident or whatever shortly before that, and then he was a strange guy, and he had that drawing or picture of the girl who died in those Santa Rosa murders. Drew knows a lot more about that than I do, but obviously Morph on the pod said he'd looked into Fred and said that there's possibly some similarity between the Zodiac handwriting. I'm just wondering, do you think there's anything? I know you stated your opinion on the episode probably, but do you think there's anything to that weird thing? It looks like they're writing to Zodiac or someone referring to themselves as Zodiac. Do you think it's just random gibberish, or is it actually something?
Well, this is a good one, really, because I think that card was August the 26th, 76. Sorry, that advertisement was first posted on August the 26th, 1976. And that was the same day that the Chronicle released an article that mentioned the transfer of William Armstrong, which was Toski's longtime partner. And I find it really curious that he says your partner is in deep real estate. Now, how could this ad mention this the same day that this article came out if this ad was given in advance to be placed in the paper? He wouldn't have known that this article was coming out on the same date. So I find it really curious that it mentions the transfer of Toski's partner on the same day that you have Zodiac, your partner is in deep real estate. So I don't know if there's a connection there. I don't know if this was placed by the Chronicle or to invoke a reaction from the Zodiac. But then again, it was 1976. Would he really be continuing to read the Chronicle at this point? I don't know. It's a difficult one.
Right.
So I don't know what the remainder of it is getting at with the Imperial Wizard, and I'll terminate your case, RA. I mean, but
yeah, I mean, I'm sure you know, but the Imperial Wizard is the leader of the Ku Klux Klan here in America. So I don't know if that's them trying to throw it off into that direction, or they're all code names. Maybe they're all code names. That's kind of how it seems. And then what about Fred Manalli and the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders? Do you think that's just a whole nother thing, or do you think there's anything there?
I don't think there's any connection with Fred Manalli, but of course he was killed in a car crash, wasn't he? So
right.
Was it about a week before?
Yeah, it's right before it. Yep.
I mean, I've read about the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, but probably about 8 years ago. So I can't really add any more on the Santa Rosa connection with Fred Manalli.
Sure.
I know Mike really liked the handwriting of Fred Manalli when he compared it to the Zodiac, and he used similar phraseology.
Right.
But other than that, I don't really know anything more about Fred Manalli and whether I can connect it to this advertisement.
Sure. I don't know. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was wondering whether you put any tack in the Fred Manalli connection.
I look at him as like, I haven't deep dived him yet. So Drew is kind of my resource on that. I don't know, Drew, if you're still with us in the chat, I would like your thoughts on this. Because I believe the girl was Wendy, that she the one that had the barrel with her that she planned to create the drum with of the was it Japanese soy sauce, and the theory floated that the characters on that barrel were similar to those Japanese gibberish characters written in the Exorcist letter. So that's as far as I could go with it. If Manalli knew someone, maybe he could have been a letter runner, or maybe again it was another similar situation to Klingel, where these people were people that, I'm going to spitball, complete speculation, spoiler alert, guys, that maybe Zodiac somehow knew these people and thought like, oh yeah, those guys would be good guys to, insinuate this type of framing thing too. So I as far as like Graysmith bringing in the Santa Rosa thing, I don't know, because that doesn't really seem like Zodiac's MO. So I don't really think that is a thing, but unless it's connected to this advertisement in the classifieds, as you said.
I see no connection to Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders with the Zodiac killer.
Right.
I can easily see a connection between many of these cases in the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders to the same person, if not all of them, but some of them at least. But certainly Arthur Lee Allen connected with those murders. I don't think Arthur Lee Allen murdered anybody ever. I see no evidence that he murdered anybody. So I know he had the trailer there, but that's not really any great connection. So, and when we can't pin any murders on Allen at all, effectively he was a child molester, and that was it. So
exactly, and even when he did that to those kids, we bribed them with money and gifts, right? So like Drew hammers that all the time. That's like, dude, if he killed those kids and hid the bodies, he could have got away scot-free with that. You know what I mean? And he would have never even did the time for the molestation arrest. So I tend to agree with you there. Apparently, they do have DNA from the Santa Rosa thing. So, don't they have Alan's brain preserved? So, you think if they even thought that was a thing, they could test it, right? And verify it.
And they've got DNA from the 78 letter,
right,
according to
right.
them. And they should have kept, the printout or the of the DNA. They wouldn't have to keep retesting it. Once they've done it, they've got a record of it. So
right.
I would like to think they could rule him out as well as the fingerprint. So, and Arthur Lee, I mean, the best thing going for Arthur Lee Allen, I know Mike likes William Andrew, is the connection to near the payphone. Yep. But again, I wouldn't put the connection to Zodiac living near that payphone at 100%. I'd give it a fair probability, but again, more likely he lived in Vallejo rather than he lived near the payphone at the very least. So, but that's the only good thing I can see that connects Arthur Lee Allen to any of the Zodiac, that he was in the correct proximity to commit their first two murders, the first two attacks, sorry.
Right. He's in the perfect center radius. So it makes him like the perfect framing suspect in many ways, you know what I mean? And for all the other reasons we've listed. The final thing I have for you, and I learned about this on the Zodiac Speaking podcast, and I thought this was so peculiar and out there, was the thing about the school teacher and what was that, the poison, the poison in his soda when he went to drink it and spit it out. If you could just refresh my audience on that and just give your thoughts if you think there's anything there, if that could be Zodiac or that's just a random weird happenings.
Well, this is probably the crime most outside the Zodiac confirmed crimes that I believe could have been Zodiac.
Right.
In the sense that the day after the Jim Dunbar show, a lot of menacing calls over a 2-week period were sent to Daniel Williams' home at 1234 Bush Street in Martinez. Now, he was a high school teacher, the Salesian high school teacher in Richmond. Mm-hmm. And this sort of ties in with the threat on school children and school buses. Mm-hmm. And this culminated with somebody breaking open the screen of his house, sneaking in and lacing his 7-Up drink with some arsenic. And then on November the 5th, somebody rang the Martinez Police Department and said there's going to be a shooting at 1234 Bush Street. And this was the run-up to the November the 8th dripping pen card, where the Zodiac said, "You won't hear the news for a while. I thought you'd need a good laugh before you hear the bad news." He didn't kill Daniel Williams because he spat the drink out. Mm-hmm. But clearly the intention was to kill him because there was enough arsenic to kill a human being. Mm-hmm. And when he wrote, there's ongoing activity, you won't get the news for a while yet. And then when you get the bus bomb letter, he states, up to the end of October, I have killed 7. Well, why doesn't he just say I've killed 7? Why up to the end of October? This to me suggested there was still ongoing activity and he was still pursuing him, or suggesting the notion that he was pursuing him still. And there's another connection that he said to Daniel Williams over the phone, I was going to a Martinez school, possibly to attack it or whatever. And he said, but the police were there, but they won't catch me because I'm too smart for them. And then the bus bomb letter says just after the introduction part, it says, I've been too clever for them. Mm-hmm. So there's the crossover of language there. And then I went on to mention the crosshairs at the bottom, the 6, 8, 9, 10, 11. You've got 5 X's around a circumference. And it so happens that if you line up the attack site at Blue Rock Springs and Lake Herman Road and draw a line through it, it passes directly over Mount Diablo. Mm-hmm. And then all the other points pass over his canonical crimes and the San Jose murders, which he was also claiming in the dripping pen card and bus bomb letter. Mm-hmm. So, and the only one that was left over And if you remember, by the crosshairs with the little X's around it, he said, he suggests the idea that if you do not print this in the paper, I will do my thing. And the only crosshair that was available that was the 9 o'clock position. And when you lined all these up with the other crimes he was claiming, and then put a line through the 9 o'clock position, it passed over the Silesian High School of Daniel Williams. So all these things connected. And I thought, if this is a hoaxer, why do you go to all this effort of trying to kill somebody? Most hoaxers hoax the letters. They don't go out their way to try and kill somebody.
Break into their house.
Break into their house, stalk their house at night, phone the Martinez Police Department, and continue this for 2 weeks. And then my suggestion is that he mentioned it in the next 2 letters as well. All this leads me to believe this could very well have been Zodiac, or he could have just possibly read it and just fed into it. I don't know, but what hoaxer goes out the way to try and kill somebody?
Yeah, I would agree. I was quite surprised to learn that on the episode when I was listening to the podcast, because I was like, this sounds so crazy. This could be Zodiac. You know what I mean? Because I could see him trying that. He's already done everything else. You know what I mean? So again, tried to outdo himself or whatever it may be. That was my final question for you. Jack Myers did have a question. Any thoughts on radians? And I think you kind of covered it right there in your answer. I can see the radian thing, but wasn't there a thing about when you draw the radians through Mount Diablo, they don't all exactly line up? Like, I thought one of the radians was off. Like, was it Blue Rock Springs or one of those, like, didn't quite land on the exact location? But again, I don't really know that aspect quite as well as some of the others.
Well, the only idea behind the bus bomb thing was to actually fit it through all those crimes. I said, those 5 X's.
Yep.
You have to tilt the crosshairs to about 13, 14 degrees, which is not the 17 degrees you'd have to tilt it in 1970, which was the difference between true north and. But my idea was this was his early idea of the Mount Diablo connection, which is why he brought it up on June the 26th, 1970. I think this was a rudimentary early example of it. Can't prove it, but the guy in the Chronicle thought so as well, because he mentioned this in the Chronicle. If you go back and look through the Chronicle articles, he suggests this idea, including the Snoozy Furlong murders.
Sure.
So, yeah, I mean, I've given my reasons on the radians before. I won't go into all the details on that one.
Absolutely. No, I think you've done quite well, and you've given us some excellent insights today on this edition of the Zodiac Files Volume 6, Richard Grinnell. I think we're going to pretty much wrap it up, guys. Would have been cool to get more audience questions, but I think we covered quite a bit, sir. You know what I mean? We really went through everything from the pre-crimes to the canonicals to the correspondence to the crazy after the fact tangential crimes. So we're going to pretty much take us out here unless anybody has any final questions. Richard Grinnell, ZodiacCyphers.com, and you can check him out on the Zodiac Speaking podcast. Do you have any other projects or anything else you would like to plug before you go, sir?
Nothing at the moment, Ross, but what I would say is if you ever want to have another chat anytime, any place, we can always do it again and discuss other things.
Absolutely. I think it would definitely be excellent to get you back, given how well this episode went. So I hope you guys like it. We went a little bit extended, guys, but as we know, this Zodiac thing is a very, very complicated, long timeline. So it's difficult to break down, but I feel like we did a pretty good job on this episode. So please like, subscribe, share, check out the Zodiac Speaking podcast, and give those guys a rate and a review. And we'll see what we come up with next time. Hopefully we'll have the Zodiac Files episode 4. That will actually be the Gavita Beach murders once we get up there. So I hope you guys enjoy that. Thank you, everybody who came through. Thank you guys all for watching live. And if you like the show, feel free to share it and give it a like. Until next time.
Cheers, Ross.